You are now listening to the Two Dads Run podcast. Just two dads who run, talking about running and being dads and some other stuff.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Two Dads Run podcast, and this is Kevin.
This is Greg.
And hello, we're doing a little bit different today. I'm actually flying solo by myself. I don't have Gray's beautiful blue eyes and brown hair 2 feet away from me.
My eyes are green, sir.
Green.
But yeah, so it's a little different. I'm sitting in my driveway in my Jeep, so with a pair of headphones on. We just couldn't get connected this week to do the in person, so we'll do it this way for now, I guess.
Yeah, you know what, and that's dedication to you and I both, because you know this thing we've been doing has been pretty fun, man. But being able, for when we're both or one of us is tired, we're like, oh man, we got to make sure we got to get this done, and you know, here we are several episodes in, and we've been just want to say, man, it's been pretty cool, been pretty consistent with it, and you know, we'll find a way, like right now.
Yeah,
so.
It has been fun. Episode 8, so you know, we're getting there. We're putting them in the books, but yeah, no, it was cool.
Cool.
One thing happened this week I want to talk about is that we joined the Y, which is right across the street from my house. And the very first thing we did, now I've never even set foot in the joint yet, but I have been to the pool. And I'm sitting here thinking, you know what, maybe swimming some laps would be cool. So maybe after talking to Ben Canoe and hanging out with you and running with Chad, you know, all you triathlete guys.
Oh boy.
I think maybe we may be inching closer to getting Gray in a triathlon.
Dude,
but
don't tease me like that, man. Because trust me.
Hey, worst case scenario, it's another training opportunity to kind of get in some work when the legs are feeling a little beat up, and it's just a good cross training opportunity, and maybe not so much of a competitive opportunity.
Well, you know, your boy is a USA Triathlon Level 1 certified coach, so I just may hook you up with maybe a good discount or something. But hell yeah, man. Well, you know where to come to for any questions about gear and stuff, because that's one thing too I'm looking at right now is a new triathlon bike, since I've got all this time on my hands and still just kind of rehabbing the leg. But I'm thinking about pulling the trigger here maybe in the next couple weeks, because about that time I could probably get on the bike. But just want to have something a little lighter, something more maneuverable, that I don't have to be too concerned about flying off a mountain in Chile. So
yeah, that would not be ideal.
Yeah.
I mean, the bike is really the big scary component of competing in triathlons. I mean, it's a pretty big expense, so you better be sure that you are serious about doing that sport, because I mean, some of these bikes cost 3 times as much as my first car. So
yeah,
true. It's a big deal. So
yeah, it's, but the neat thing about cycling is if it's in triathlon or if it's not, you see quite a few people doing it. I mean, probably a large demographic, that are older than you and I, and guys that are, in their 70s and 80s and still doing it. So, it's definitely a sport where it's like running, where you're not putting all that wear and tear on your body. So so you do the investment now, but a bike can last forever. I think that's kind of the neat or the weird thing that I found out, just haven't been in cycling for a while, is that it's like the car that you're driving, the good old nice 4-door Jeep Wrangler, man. The resale value, it holds itself, and most bikes do that.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's probably something that I'll look into at some point. I'll let you pull that trigger first, for sure.
I've already got a couple saved for you. But anyways, dude, go ahead. You had something?
No, that's I know you sent me a couple already, and I'm just just imagining how we're gonna make that work.
Yeah, I know. If Kristen wants to know like what your future purchases are or your hidden purchases, she just has to listen to this. Oh, Gray's got a bike coming up. I'll be looking out
Well,
for that.
Ben Canute said he was going to send me one. He was going to get on that, so we may have to reach back out.
You're going to throw Ben under the bus,
Ben.
man.
Hey, it's on record.
Oh, what? It's on record you're throwing him under the bus?
No, it's on record him saying he'd give me I asked if anybody wanted to donate a bike, and he said he'd get right on it. So, we're like a week later, and
Oh man!
Just kidding, Ben. Not like he's
hooking up anybody. Yeah, I think his weapon of choice is a Trek Speed Concept, if I'm not mistaken, but definitely a Trek rider. So if he was hooking up one of those, you've got a nice badass rocket. But hey, by the way, remember that race that he was telling us about, the one in Utah?
Yeah.
So that's actually coming up this weekend, which is actually the 70.3 North American Championship. So all the top.
It's a big boy.
It's a big one. Yeah. It's one where you've got, I'm pretty sure it's North American, and crap, for my triathlete peeps, I'm sorry. I just haven't had much time. Like, was it the North American or was it the World 70.3? Anyways, I
think you said North American.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I don't know why I'm overthinking, but yeah, you've got badass after badass actually is going to be up there. So, great, man. What are you so excited about with the podcast we have today?
So we have an awesome guest. I mean, all of our guests so far have been awesome, but this guy has been a mainstay in track and field for 20 years. Huge inspiration to guys our age that are interested in running. I mean, this guy has performed at such an elite level for the last, 20 years. And he actually recently, back in January, broke the record for most consecutive years of running a sub 4 minute marathon. So he just ran for the 19th consecutive year. He ran a sub 4 minute marathon. I mean, that's just insane. So, and I'm talking about Nick Willis. I mean, the guy is just a monster, a model of consistency. And we had, I'm really looking forward to speaking with Nick, because just, such an inspirational dude.
Oh man, Nick Willis is to you as Ben Canute is to me, and with you again, kind of the vice versa thing. So it was amazing when you first told me that you were able to connect with Nick and he was more than willing to speak with us. Bruh, I was like, hells yeah, this guy is such a badass.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely kind of, shoot your shot, but I was really excited that, he agreed to come on the show with us and, have a really great conversation. So let's get right to that. Let's check out the interview. I hope you guys enjoy it. We'll see you on the flip side. All right, everybody, joining us on the show today, we have arguably the most consistent presence in middle distance running over the last 2 decades. This gentleman is a 2-time Olympic medalist in the 1,500 meters, and that is just the start of a really long list of accolades for this guy. Welcome to the show, Nick Willis. Nick, how are you, sir?
Hey, guys. Thanks so much for having me. I'm doing pretty well overall. Right now, I'm actually I'm tired. I've just finished a killer workout, and I'm on the floor in my basement stretching and eating peanut butter as we chat. So please excuse my mouthful of calories right here.
No, absolutely. We appreciate your time. And as I mentioned, you have a long list of accomplishments and records, which we'll definitely talk more about as we kind of progress through the conversation here. But aside from that, how would you describe yourself to our listeners that may have been living under a rock for the last 20 years?
I'm a kid who grew up in New Zealand, just like any old kid who played a bunch of different sports and sort of gravitated towards rugby and golf and athletics, which is track and field. And did basketball until I was obviously way too short to keep that going on. And just like a pretty typical Kiwi kid growing up, but my family was involved in track and field, and so I put more and more time and focus into that, and it gave me the opportunity to travel the world, to everyone down under has a bit of island fever. We want to see what the whole big wide world has to offer. And it brought me to the States on scholarship to the University of Michigan. I've now raced on every continent on the earth except for the poles. And I've managed to make a ton of friends along the way. And it's given me everything that I know. And so running is a huge part of my life, obviously, but I'm also someone who suffered a bit of family tragedy at a young age. When I was 5, my mum died of cancer. And so that really shaped a lot of who I was as a child. And I really felt like I was in a fight against the world to a degree, not necessarily in an angry way, but I wanted to make a name for myself and show that wasn't going to impact me or limit me. And that was a huge motivation for me to always need to be the best at everything I tried, and to try and put my head above the crowd, so to speak. And when I sort of was also running from the grief of that for many, many years, I didn't ever sort of deal with her loss until I was 20 years old. So 15 years of running away from dealing with my mum's loss. And at that time, it also brought me back to my family's faith as Christians. It's something I had run away from. And I stopped being angry at God for allowing my mum to die when I was such a young age. And I came to peace with that. And I accepted many of the same views as my family had always held as Christians. And so I became a Christian when I was a sophomore in college, and that has also shaped a lot of who I've become and tried to become as I got married and became a dad, and now I've got 2 young kids. And it's also shaped a lot of my outlook on why I run and what motives I have. And sure, I enjoy the success and all of the rewards that come along the way, but I always try and reflect back like there's a greater purpose to what I do, and hopefully there's still a purpose for me running at 38 that hopefully it inspires, but also shows people how to look after one's body to quite a fine, acute detail that running requires. Even in your late 30s, you can still do that and treat your body like a temple. So yeah, that's sort of the quick summary, I suppose.
Yeah. Wow. Well, you're certainly an inspiration for Kevin and I. I mean, I'm 38. Kevin, I think, just turned 39 recently. So to be able to see somebody like you who can still perform at such an elite and internationally elite level is certainly inspirational for us. And really appreciate you sharing that about your mom and kind of your past. So you talked about a lot of different sports. Was it kind of that mentally therapeutic side of running that was maybe why you stuck with running and kind of let those other sports go, or was it just because you were just better at running than everything else?
Oh, I definitely enjoyed competing, and I loved, like, at school. I remember in elementary school, what we call primary school in New Zealand, like, you'd always line up the fast kids who's the fastest, or sometimes we'd have visits with other schools. All the kids from your school would walk over to the neighboring school a couple of miles away, and then during the lunch break, they would all right, who's your fastest in your school? And they'd bring 3 or 4 kids out and line you up against them, and the whole school would sort of line the soccer field and then cheer you on, and be like a big match race to see who the big dog was. That even though running as a sport wasn't necessarily big in New Zealand, that's just what kids gravitated towards. It was like the way to see who had the status, I suppose. So I was always the marquee person that repped my school that way, and I enjoyed that element of it. I did love the team sports, basketball and rugby, but as I got older, the politics of team sports really frustrated me to no end, and I always probably had a higher view of my own ability than maybe what I was, and so I would argue with my coaches or the people, the selectors, about positions that I got placed in or my playing time and all that sort of stuff, and I enjoyed that I basically got to dictate my own terms as a runner, that there's no way politics really gets in the way. It's like everyone's on the start line, everyone got a chance, and who's willing to put themselves into the death box that is cross-country racing, or the 800 meters the most, is going to come out triumphant, and you can't be angry at anyone else. It's totally up to you, and I enjoyed that putting all of that weight on my own shoulders and not being dependent on others. I think I did enjoy that individual element to it.
Yeah,
absolutely. I love that description, the death box, because that's
exactly
I've never heard that before. Cross-country in the 800s. Gray and I were both on our state championship 4x8 relay team, and that was one of my favorite events, but then cross country. Yeah, you've got kids lined up from all across the state, and then sometimes across country, and it's just may the best man win. And I miss that type of lineup, but probably just kind of like the same like with you throughout the years. That competitive piece has just always been part of you, and and correct me if I'm wrong. The reason why I continue to do is I just love testing my body, and not so much to see how it compared to others, but just when the race is done, it's like, wow, I can't believe I was able to push myself to do that. But I just kind of want to back up. So New Zealand, my wife is actually born and raised from Indiana, so I'm very familiar with the Midwest. We still go out there quite a bit to travel and to see our family. So New Zealand to Michigan. How did you select Michigan out of all the universities in the country? I'm sure you had an opportunity, but how did you select University of Michigan?
Well, my brother is 8 years older than me. We actually share the same birthday, which is pretty remarkable. And he also
Steve, I believe.
Steve, yeah. And he has also run a sub 4 minute mile. So he really was the one who paved the way for me. He was setting all of the junior records when he was 7 through 15. And then those were the times that I sort of aimed for our local city, sort of at track and field competitions. But he went over on a scholarship to a D2 school in Colorado called Western State College in Gunnison. And there basically was a pipeline of New Zealanders who had gone. A coach had built a relationship with a few local coaches in New Zealand. And back then, before the internet really took off with track and field, like once you get one athlete, then they tell their friend, and then they tell their friend, and sort of like year after year that happens. But in those instances when athletes would only go to 4 or 5 different schools around America, there were only a handful of schools that sort of had that connection to New Zealand. They built this prevailing sentiment, might be the best way to describe it, amongst New Zealanders and Australians probably as well, and the local running fraternity, that if a high school kid went off to the States on a scholarship, that they would get sort of expected to race 3 times a week at these dual meets that they used to run in the 80s and 90s. And sort of you have to earn your scholarship, so to speak, and run a ton of races all the time, and you'll be used and abused and never heard from again. And so everyone was sort of they were very protective of sending athletes overseas and trying to stop you at any cost from leaving, because they were worried they'd lose you from the sport when they wanted to keep the numbers up, which were struggling anyway in New Zealand. But I, as a huge track fan myself, every weekend I would venture on the train into the city. I lived out in the suburbs, and I'd go into the capital city of Wellington, and there was one magazine store that sold track and field news in all of the whole city. So I'd probably venture 45 minutes just to go read this magazine, because it would have the list of all of the high school top performances in America each month. And so that was my way of like finding out what other kids my age were doing around the world. This is before the internet sort of was telling us with all these updated lists every day, right? And on the cover of one of these magazines was the finish of the NCAA mile, in which Kevin Sullivan won. And it was this race where Brian Berryhill was the runner for Colorado State. He had his arms in the air celebrating a victory, but Kevin Sullivan dipped under his arm on a big lunge. So Brian Berryhill had celebrated too early, and Kevin Sullivan out-dipped him, and he had this big block M on his shirt. I thought, man, that's really cool. And that picture really like etched into my mind. Like I knew about the block M at that stage for Michigan. And I knew of Brian Berryhill because he had come to race in New Zealand a couple of times in our summer track series, which is during the American winter break. So for whatever reason, I knew about those two athletes from that point on after studying that magazine cover. Then maybe 3 or 4 years later, I was watching the Sydney Olympics, and Kevin Sullivan from Michigan ended up finishing 5th in the final at the Olympic Games. So I was like, wow, I have no idea who that guy's coach is, but if he was an NCAA star winning the mile, and then after college still was running at the top of the world, finishing 5th at the Olympics, his coach must know what he's doing. He must know how to like still have him run well in college and get points, but also have a successful career afterwards, which wasn't very common in the 90s in America. And so I thought I got to be coached by his coach. So I had no idea who that was, but I wanted to go to Michigan at that point. And so I found out the coach there, his name was Ron Warhurst, and I emailed him and never heard back from him. At that time, I'd run like a 4:18 mile and maybe a 1:52 800. But then 7 or 8 months later, I ran a 4:01 mile and a 1:48 800. And the very next day, Ron Warhurst called up John Walker, the great New Zealand miler, the Olympic champion. He got his phone number and said, "John, this is Ron Warhurst, University of Michigan." And John Walker's response right away was like, "I know who you are, and he's not for sale." Except he used a New Zealand accent, not an American one. He says, "I don't want to buy him, I want to coach him." And so Ron got my number and told me that story, and yeah, that's basically how it's happened. And so I started watching Home Improvement every day on TV to learn about the state of Michigan after that point.
That's right.
Wow.
And it turns out that my father-in-law is pretty much the combination of Al Borland and the guy over the fence. So it's worked out pretty perfect that I've gotten to know Michigan that way.
That's
awesome.
an awesome story.
Hey, for the record, Kevin's last name is Sullivan. So.
Oh, really? You're Kevin Sullivan?
Yeah, so I was going to say that.
Kevin Sullivan, though.
And of course, now Kevin Sullivan is the coach at Michigan, so he's sort of taken over and kept the tradition going. So sort of that's full circle right there.
Oh, yeah.
So they still have the pipeline of New Zealand athletes?
Ron recruited a few more New Zealanders. Kevin's now got a couple of Australians, but it's a totally different world now with the internet. You can see the results of every race. The whole world is a recruiting pool. It's not just through word of mouth anymore.
Yeah, I mean, for us coming up when we were running, being here in kind of the South or Mid-East, Mid-Atlantic region, we had Alan Webb, and everyone knew who Alan Webb was. So, he would show up at some invitationals here and there. And so that was kind of our big, because again, we're the same age as you, and we didn't have that. So everybody kind of knew the regional guys and the bigger names, just locally.
And of course, Alan went to Michigan the year before I ended up getting there, because my recruiting process was like a year and a half. And so that, there was a lot of hype around the program because of Alan and all of that. But the way that when you're talking about the lack of information, I joke with my competitors now. I'm like, you know how old I am? When I was a freshman in college, the first paper I handed in, I wrote on paper. I didn't even type it out. I hand wrote it, and whereas that was unheard of now for college freshmen to hand write a paper that they hand into the professor.
Oh yeah. So as our name, as the name of our podcast suggests, Kevin and I are both dads, and we like to spend some time talking to our guests that have, children about their families. And, we know that you mentioned earlier you have 2 kids. What has been some of your proudest or best moments as a father so far?
Yeah, I've got 2 sons. Lachlan is 7.5, almost 8, and Darcy is turned 3 in January. He's a boy, and they're both wild and uncontrollable, but also very sweet. So it's been an awesome ride. I think firstly, as a dad, it took me the big game changer for me was probably 13 months after my first child was born. I think up to that point, there was a big part of me that, even though I didn't want to admit it at the time, I felt like I was being limited in my life because all of the things I couldn't do because I've now got these responsibilities and the time commitments, and I can't go play golf now. I can't do this. I can't do that. And I really focused on what I was missing out on. And that the big light bulb moment was when I suddenly started taking a huge amount of joy in the things my kid was interested in. And maybe it was because he became older, so it was more evident to me that what his interests were. It was harder for me to read a 4 or 5 month old baby, right? And so that was that. Ever since that moment, it's been such a joy. I might play golf once every 3 years or something now, and I don't care at all because whatever my kids are interested in, it's that's the funnest thing to be a part of. And so it's really just switching the perspective of that. That really revolutionized my experience from how I enjoy being a parent, but I'm sure that probably projects also towards my kids enjoy it more because I'm interested in their things as well. So that's probably the first thing that I'd state.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's very valid. I think that's something that's not talked about enough is that, people expect people that don't have kids or about to embark on that, they just expect this child to be born and there's going to be this immediate bonding process that happens. And, especially from a father's point of view, those early days, that child is so dependent on mom, for so many things, especially if it's a breastfeeding mother and things like that. So, it's harder for us as fathers to sometimes build those bonds and to, undergo that life-changing moment. And I think that's something that's not talked about enough, but it is very valid and fair. It does take some time. These things aren't always immediate, and that doesn't mean that you're not as good a parent as the next person. But, it's hard to know when they're so young and so, so small, and there's not a ton of personality there yet. It can be hard to form that bond. So I'm thank you for bringing that up.
And it's not that there weren't significant moments that I didn't enjoy. Like one of my favorite moments was the times when they're so tired, when they're so little that they just are asleep on your lap, this tiny little human in your lap. And like, that's the sweetest moment ever. But in terms of actual, like, I'm an activities person. I like going out and doing stuff. And so that was the big game changer for me. So for us as a family, like, we always give it a go, and we take part in a whole bunch of different things. I played a ton of different sports when I was a kid. So like, I've tried to expose my older son especially, to as many different things as possible. Sometimes he's shy and nervous to show up to something, but like, hey, if you don't like it after a couple of times, that's fine. We never have to go again, but you have to at least give it a go. So we've tried everything, and the things that he gravitates towards now is BMX racing. Like, I would have never thought of even thinking of BMX racing, but it's the funnest sport ever. But it was the only sport that was going on during the pandemic last year, so we took that up, and now he loves it, and he loves his basketball, and he's also into rock collecting, and he wants to become a geologist in his mind, and he likes collecting toads and making terrariums for spiders and stuff like that. So yeah, there's a lot of things that I'm learning which I would have never thought about before. So that's probably the most fun thing. I probably pushed a little hard trying to get him into skateboarding because that was my thing as a kid. And he doesn't mind it, but I realized like that's my thing more so than his thing.
I was going to say that is the tricky thing too, is where you're trying not to drive your passions onto your kids because they're your kids, and why wouldn't they like it? You like it, and especially something that you do so consistently, and something that's just always out there for them to see. With the running piece, so you mentioned the BMX. Your son definitely loves the BMX. Especially the 7.5-year-old, has he started to go run with you? Have you started to get him involved with some of your training, or at least kind of get him somewhat acclimated to the running scene by, hey, it's in your blood, it's in your genes. So if you want to learn, now's a good time for you. Have you started to do that yet?
Well, I'll say this, is that I actually never went for a run until I was about 16 or 15.
Oh, wow.
I ran track, and I competed in track ever since I was 4 years old. Like, I raced the 60, the 100, the 200, shot put, high jump, long jump, all of that stuff, discus. And I loved it. I did it as a sport. We had a club night once a week and a competition every second weekend. But I never trained for the sport of track and field until I was 15 or 16. And so I've always felt really strongly about that. And the beauty of track compared to, at least especially running, compared to most sports, because it's not a skill sport, it's not something that you have to do at a young age in order to have a chance at being good at it later. So I've always been of the belief, like, try and do as many other activities as possible and keep them away from running as much as possible, because the number one reason why most of us run, especially like in the masses, when you see these major marathons and all of these thousands of people at all these events, there's like a huge component of delayed gratification involved in running. It's one of the ultimate exercises to like experience like what delayed gratification means. It personifies it. You put in all of this hard work, the daily, weekly, monthly, and then the actual work during the race, and at the end you finally get that satisfaction afterwards. But kids have a much harder ability to grasp that concept of delayed gratification. They need rewards a lot more immediately, and I don't believe running really gives that, whereas a lot of these other team sports can do that. So I would prefer to sort of for him not to do that. But I never tell a kid not to run if they want to, but I would never ask them to do it. Like, I never think it should be prescribed to them per se. But secondly, because my wife is one of my coaches, and because we homeschool, and because it's been my job for the last forever, for the last so many years, like, my kids and my wife are at every single one of my workouts and every single one of my races. So at the World Championships in Beijing, when my son was 3 in the 2015 World Champs, my wife was my coach there in at the warm-up track on the athlete bus going from the village to the track to the stadium. So my son's been around that world. He's been in the dining halls at the Monaco Golden League. He's all of the Kenyans will pick him up and pass him around and play with him. Like, so he knows all of the professional runners, and he's like, that's a world that he's immersed in, and it's just normal for him. And so sure, he will like go and time himself to run a lap every now and then, but it's never something that comes from my end. But mostly he just comes down to the track and he likes to see my coach because he brings donuts and chocolate milk. And my coach's son is 18 now, and he went through that whole process from the day he was born. He was down at the track every day for practices when we were there. And it's such a cool environment for kids. Like, we would always throw the ball for him or play games, like, from when he was 2 all the way up to now he's 18. But now he's hanging out with us. He's not a runner. He's a race car driver. And he actually films, like, he does a lot of the videography for our training group. He's down there at the track playing with my kids, so it's sort of become full circle. So the track is a fun place. It's a safe place that's fenced in where kids can sort of go explore, and you don't have to worry about them being hit by cars and stuff. But they have a pretty big area to like go fun in the long jump pit and or over at the water jump at the steeplechase, or just go play in the grass, or on occasion, I guess, race someone on the track as well.
That's awesome.
So I'm sure that you haven't made it 30 minutes into an interview over the last 3 or 4 months without being asked about the streak. So for our listeners that don't know, Nick in January became the first person to ever run a sub 4-minute mile for 19 consecutive years. I mean, that's amazing. How do you think you've been able to be so consistent for so long?
I'm sure there's a huge amount of luck involved in it. Like, one might look at that streak and think, oh, he's had a huge amount of luck of being healthy for 19 years. But the truth is, like, I've had 5 surgeries. I've had my hip, my knee twice, a hernia, had a bunch of pulled muscles. I've had about 7 stress fractures over the year. I've missed significant time out of my running.
Wow.
But so I've been fortunate that nearly all of my injuries have been ones that are like conclusively injured. Like, okay, you need surgery, you have a stress fracture, a pulled muscle, you have to take time off. And then there's like a prescribed rehab protocol. Whereas people who have Achilles tendonitis or like these nagging sort of like knee tendinopathy stuff, it's like they're half there, half not. And so that just drags out for years, and then you never get to realize your full potential. Mine's like, all right, take 3 months away from the sport, go live life, come back, and then start getting back again. And so I've been fortunate that I've had nothing that sort of nags or drags me out. And I think that wears on people mentally, that it just makes them eventually want to quit. Like, it's not worth it anymore, just running in pain. I've never really had to like run through like nagging or dragging out pain. And I've had really, really good Achilles tendons throughout my whole career. And I think that's, the Achilles is the Achilles heel, right? Mm-hmm. That's what ends up taking most people out, especially in their later years, because of that nagging. And so because I got super strong Achilles, like, I'm still able to bounce off the track on my toes pretty well at 38 still, and hang out, keep up with the young kids in the sprints and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, there's a bit of luck involved. But I also got to be honest, like, because my very top end ability is like my 1500 meter PR is equivalent of a 346 mile, I've got a little bit of wiggle room. So even though I've aged or gotten older, I've had years where I've been less fit because of injury, I've got a 13-second buffer to still sneak under 4 minutes on a bad year. Whereas other people who might at the very ceiling be a 356 miler, they've only got 3 seconds wiggle room to for everything to be perfect every single year, that'd be much tougher. So I think that's probably a big factor as well.
That's funny. So I'm not sure if you've been called yet, but we were called not too long ago on the show middle-aged men. And when I thought about it, I was like, my goodness, I was 39. And I'm like, I guess I'm getting to the middle-aged man, and I'm starting to realize there's certain things within my training or within my races that my body literally is not what it was capable of doing before. So a couple weeks ago, I just finished a 100-mile ultra marathon, and I knew that was going to hurt like hell. And it sure did. It put me in a walking boot for 2 weeks. But usually I've always been quick, even up until last year, to rebound from those type of injuries pretty quickly and can get back into it. But I'm still having this nagging injury, and my bones are like aching and cracking that haven't been before. So you being at where you're at kind of with our age and with the wear and tear that you've been putting on your body, but still running at a very high level elite, Nick, so has there been anything within the last couple years or maybe within the last year where you've kind of had that aha moment in your mind where, age is actually starting to settle in. I can no longer do it like this now. Has there been anything where you kind of just thought about it and kind of even laughed about it? Like, man, I can't believe it's finally happened. That I can't do that now, or I can't do it as well now.
Yeah, I think there's several components to that. On a positive side, I feel like I've become a lot wiser over the years. I've actually been the most healthy I've been in my whole career the last 3 years. And I think that has like the things that I've learned and the wisdom and how to understand my own body far exceeds the potential frailness that might have developed over the last 5 years as being an older athlete, right? And I think the number one reason, pretty much the sole reason for any injury, is when you expose whatever, the tendon, the bone, the muscle, whatever it is, to a greater load than it's been accustomed to being ready for. And our body will adapt if you slowly increase the exposure of load. Load can either be like the amount of volume, whether it be miles per week, or a straight up amount of force. Like if you suddenly try and squat 300 pounds when you've only been doing 100, like that's a big adjustment. You need to go 105, 107, 110. Like you need to do gradual adaptation to let your body like make that transition. And I think as I've been older, I've been far less likely to suddenly do something that my body hasn't transitioned to get ready for. So I'm always a lot more cognizant. Okay, if I'm going to start doing some really fast track work in 3 months' time, when March rolls around, I'm going to start doing some really fast stuff. So I need to know from December onwards, how do I smooth out that curve between December and March so that my body will be ready to do that, and so that it's not a sudden jump or a sudden shock to my calves or my Achilles or my hamstrings, like whether it be in the weight room or on the sand pit or all these different other areas. So like every single day I'm slowly exposing my body to those loads has helped. The big aha moment that you talked about that I probably had was I was in denial about it perhaps for the last 3 years, but the pandemic and the cancellation of the Olympics probably allowed me to finally move the goalposts in terms of my performances. Before, I used to just get so frustrated. 2018, 2019, I was just so frustrated after every single race and like, what's wrong? Why can't I hit the same times I was doing? And I was just really angry after every race. It wasn't fun because I had still kept the same goalposts as I had when I was at my very best. But with the Olympic year being cancelled, it allowed me to say, okay, you may not be at that level anymore, but what is a realistic level you can aim for? And now that I've shifted those goalposts, I can actually cross that finish line and know whether I've achieved my goal or not. And there's a greater likelihood that I have, so I can walk away like feeling really positive about that experience. And the streak of sub 4 minute miles was a really tangible goal that I had, which was something that was achievable, but still meant a lot. And it kept me excited for training. So it enabled me to derive joy from training again, that there was actually value coming out of my results. It wasn't just training to be angry at the end of these races that I wasn't happy with.
Yeah, I mean, was there anything? I've heard you refer to that as kind of a recalibration of your mental game. And that can be really hard to do. And we've talked to like I mentioned earlier, we talked to Kara D'Amato, who kind of came on later. She came back to the sport after a big hiatus in her mid 30s. When we were talking to Thomas Newberger, talking about, beginning running later in life and how it can almost be better because you don't have these PRs from your like early 20s to go against. So it can be really hard for a lot of people to kind of say, okay, maybe I'm not capable of, I think you mentioned at one point not being able to run a 350 mile anymore, but now, resetting those goalposts for yourself. Was that kind of an immediate thing, or just something that you kind of had to work on over time?
No, I think because the pandemic happened and I lost all motivation for racing, I almost started from scratch and worked backwards, and I just allowed okay, let's not have any goals and then just race and see, and not try and keep up the very best in the world, start low and then slowly build up again. And the truth is, even at my very best when I was winning medals, each year I would actually start off by doing a really low-key college meet at Eastern Michigan University normally, or some low-key meets in New Zealand, and slowly build up my season that way. So I started doing that again, and then I started to realize, okay, this seems like a realistic goal, and this would be a great result if I were to get it. And so now I've sort of come up with some numbers which we think, based on my training, are more realistic. The thing I seem to struggle most with now is sort of processing the lactate if the race goes out fast at the start. I seem to still be able to close well on a tactical race, but if it's a hard from the beginning, I cross that red line a lot earlier in the race than I used to. And so there's some physiological things that my body isn't quite doing at the same high level that it was before. That's probably what I've noticed the most, but it's not necessarily something I can physically tell in terms of my muscles or anything like that.
Sure. How many times have you raced this year, if at all? And do you have more upcoming?
I actually only raced once last year once the pandemic happened after March, and I had no interest in racing, partly because my one time you had to get 2 COVID tests the week of the race, and both of them were brain ticklers that went way up super deep, and I was this isn't worth it. Especially when I didn't race well. But then this year I ended up racing 7 times in 7 weekends during the indoor winter season. Some of them were outdoor races down in Florida or Alabama or California. But yeah, I really enjoyed racing again, and partly because I managed to find a place to get self-administered COVID tests, so I didn't have to go as deep. But partly because I had finally accepted that it's okay to have a different goalpost anymore again. And I missed traveling. I've been traveling for the last 20 years, so often it was sort of something I hadn't done last year. So running was a good excuse to be able to do that.
That's great to hear. So it sounds like the amount of time off, if it was for an injury or unfortunately last year where it hit everybody with the pandemic, has really continued to just bring more life and joy into you and into the sport to be the better athlete, but then to be the better husband and father. So that's cool. And you mentioned as far as the goalposts had changing. So I know Gray was just asking about races that you've recently done, but what are some of those, I would say those big, hairy, audacious goals that you have right now? What are some of those big things that you're looking forward in the future? I'd say maybe within the next 2 years that's kind of on your docket right now, Nick.
Probably my biggest goal now that I've been selected for the Tokyo Games would be to make the final. And if you'd asked me last year, I thought there's no way that I could possibly make the final just because I was really struggling in my performances. But I had a race back in March where whatever happened, the race went out really slow for the first half of the race. And I actually felt amazing because of that, because as I said, I'm struggling in races that go out too hard at the start. And I end up closing as good as I ever have. And so in the right type of race in a semi-final at the Olympics, I think I can still potentially run well enough to make the final, and that would be an awesome way to end my days as a 1,500 meter runner at the Olympics. It'll be my 5th game. So but even if I don't make the final, I won't be upset. I'm pretty proud to have qualified, but that's what I'm working hard towards now. Maybe if I give a marathon a go, that could be another audacious goal. But to be honest, I don't want to, after this year, I don't really want to prioritize my running over other interests with my family stuff and other hobbies and stuff that I've got going on. So I'll still run, but I'm not going to make it the number one priority. It won't be one that I would be willing to make too many sacrifices for.
Got it. The Olympics.
Marathon's a big transition.
So
yeah, I mean, if I do a marathon, it would only be for another 6 or 7 months after the Olympics. It wouldn't be like for another 2 or 3 years.
Fair.
But honestly, like in my role at Tracksmith, I manage several programs within Tracksmith, but one of the primary ones that I do is I manage our elite program called the Amateur Support Program, and we have 115 athletes in it. And I've been interviewing many of these athletes and having chats. And what I'm learning is that distance runners are much more capable of holding full-time jobs or careers, because even though marathon running requires a relative high amount of time putting in the mileage, you can get your run in whenever you need to. Like if you have a 9 to 5, you can get up at 6 a.m. and get your run in. You can run after work. You can run at lunchtime. But if you're a sprinter or a field eventer, like there's a lot less flexibility in when you train, because you're more dependent on facility access, on coaching, the technical element, and all that sort of stuff. And it seems to be a much higher percentage of those athletes are having to work side hustles or part-time jobs until after their career's over, until their athletic career is over before they can start pursuing their professional career. So that's been something I've learned, which is quite fascinating.
Well, you actually just segued perfectly into my next question. I was going to ask, now that you're no longer, professional and stepped into more of the quote unquote amateur side of the sport, you started this position with Tracksmith. How did that come about?
I guess it started off with when I had the opportunity to either seek out another sponsorship renewal with my current sponsor Adidas, or with another brand perhaps. My wife actually first came up with the idea, maybe we could use this as an opportunity to get your foot in the door for your post-running career as well. A way to get my resume to the top of the pile, so to speak. Because I guess for the last 10 years, there's been a little bit of anxiety of is anyone actually going to accept me in the real world? It's one thing while you're a runner, but what am I going to do afterwards? And we were very fortunate that several years earlier, about 3.5 years before this took place, the CEO and co-founder of Tracksmith, Matt Taylor, was actually a customer or client of my wife and I's with this online coaching business we had called Mile Method, where we helped athletes train for the mile for 6 weeks. And so we developed a connection with him, and he invited us to the grand opening of their Newbury Street store, which opened 3.5 years ago. And we went to that, and with no thought in mind. But then when I came up with this idea of maybe seeking to use my running as a stepping stone into my career, I reached out to Matt first, and he offered me a full-time position in a non-traditional way of them managing things. And so I thought about it for about 7 seconds, and I said, this is exactly what I want. It'd be perfect, because there's a lot of flexibility to still be able to prioritize my training, but I also can learn from one of the best up-and-coming brands. And there's a lot of things that I've been wanting to do within the sport to better it. And although I think relatively highly of my ideation abilities and ways to execute ideas, I know that there was a lot of areas that I'm lacking, and so I wanted to better learn and partner with the companies that already had a lot of that ability to activate on. So yeah, that's exactly how it's worked out, and I've been near a year now, and it's been a lot of fun to both learn but also have a positive impact in the sport through this role.
I love the Tracksmith. Their style is pretty neat. I've been tracking that for over the last, year. How would you describe the style of Tracksmith, Nick?
The best way to describe it is a timeless aesthetic. It's not necessarily trying to chase current trends, but a style that you would be proud to pull out of your closet in 10 years' time, and you're not going to go, oh my goodness, did I really wear that 10 years ago?
So what you're saying is not a lot of neon.
No, absolutely not. That's right. And it's something that you can wear for your workout, but if you finish your workout and want to meet up with friends at a coffee shop or a brewery or something afterwards, like that, as long as you cover up your half tights and chuck on a pair of pants, like you're not going to worry with how you look. Like, and especially as someone now in my late 30s, like I'm not looking to stand out from the crowd, right? But I want to look appropriate given the circumstances, but have some class to it as well. And so I think that's really the aesthetic that Tracksmith has been doing for many years, well before I was coming on, and it's fun to learn about the processes that go into that. That's not really the area that I specialize in. That's more the product and the creative team, and I'm in the more the sports marketing side of things. But it's been really fun, sort of involving our athletes more, and that's something we're looking to do a lot more as well. So yeah, I'm really excited.
Okay, so Nick Willis, the fashion model, isn't the next step, and I guess is what I was.
Definitely not a fashion model.
Well, so,
I might be able to put one foot in front of the other decently fast, but my running form when I'm jogging looks horrendous. When I'm going fast, it looks fine, but like for photo shoots and stuff, my legs are flailing and my arms are dropped, and like there's not a lot of symmetry to my running.
Yeah, I was kind of disappointed to not see you on the website, or I was looking, I was like, "Where's Nick?"
So Gray and I we're also shoe geeks. Also, there's a couple brands that I am dedicated to just because the way they fit and feel, and some of the memories I've had in these specific brands. But your weapon of choice. So what's your current weapon of choice? What's the shoe right now that you just love, and when you put that on, and the one what's the shoe that you anticipate on wearing in Tokyo?
For training anything I get given for free, I love to wear, to be honest.
Those are great. Yeah.
As someone who ran in bare feet for most of his life and still walks around in bare feet for most of the day, like last night when my 3-year-old is biking up and down a street, I'm running on concrete in bare feet. When he was riding around on his bike, I was chasing him in bare feet. So my feet are pretty resilient, so I can wear pretty much anything, so long as it's pretty neutral. So it's been fun having the freedom to wear whatever. I was extremely grateful for my time. 8 years with Reebok and 7 years in Adidas, and I still think really highly of the Boost foam that Adidas came out with. And if I had some brand new ones of those, I'd wear them no hesitation. But right now I've got a couple of Puma shoes that I'm rotating, and I've got a couple of New Balance as well, and I've been trying out a few different spikes as well. But yeah, I'm not too fussy so long as something is. My heels never touch the ground. Even on a 20-mile run, my heel doesn't touch the ground. I try, but I've got bone spurs in my ankles, apparently X-rays have revealed. So I must have been doing it ever since I was a little kid, because I used to get made fun of because when I sort of walked around, I bounced around. It's because I can't get my knee to dorsiflex over my toes because I just don't have that flexibility in my ankles. And yeah, so I just want shoes that don't have a ton of weight in the back because I have no use of that. My heels don't touch, so why have all of that extra loading there? So something that's more neutral fitting is ideal for me.
Yeah, definitely. So I feel like we could probably do a whole nother episode just because I'm sitting here like mouth wide open. You're, prospective Olympian here in a couple months and you're running down the street barefoot. I'm mind blown. And it must be really hard for you to find shoes.
Maybe it's because I run down the street barefoot.
maybe. But Nick, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. It has been an awesome conversation. We definitely wish you the best of luck in Tokyo. We'll be rooting for you, and thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks, guys. It's been a lot of fun. I appreciate it. All the best.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank
enjoy.
You, sir.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks again to our guest today, Nick Willis. Hope you guys enjoyed the interview. I know we had a lot of fun talking to him. He's a super inspirational guy. Really cool to hear how, being a father has affected his training and his, the way that the mental side of his game has changed. over the last 20 years. So again, thanks to Nick Willis, and thank you to you, the listeners, for checking us out. If you would like to check us out on social media, we are at Two Dads Run Podcast on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. You can also reach the show at twodadsrun@gmail.com. We each have our own personal email accounts, Gray at twodadsrun.com and Kevin at twodadsrun.com. And hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please subscribe, and we'll talk to you next week.